The December requests continue to unfold, so let's unwrap this gift to see what we have today. Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the third in the Narnia series. Not really a Christmas movie, once again, but I guess people tend to go back to this series during the holidays, maybe because of the movie's relation to Christ itself, or maybe because the first one had snow in it. In any case, the third entry has always been the black sheep of the series. It wasn't made by Disney, it had a somewhat different creative team around it, and it's the one people tend to forget about, even me. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it, so let's pop it in, see what I can remember, and how it holds up compared to the first two.
After the release of Prince Caspian, which was critically and commercially less successful than the previous installment, plans for a third entry were put at a halt, and after there were deliberations between Disney and Walden Media, the latter production company decided to get distribution elsewhere with the help of 20th Century Fox, who ironically is now owned by Disney. Different distributors, different director with Michael Apted, and no more Susan and Peter, and you're in for quite a different movie. Based on a 1952 C.S. Lewis novel, this already had the complication of a boring source material. Narnia fans have often regarded Voyage of the Dawn Treader to be the worst in the series, and seeing the adaptation, I can understand why. There's not as much of an overall plot this time around. Instead, it takes a Homer's Odyssey approach, traveling on boat, running into different magical locations and problems, and chasing several MacGuffins that ultimately lead to an anticlimactic finale. The last two films are so majestic and filled with fantasy adventure, and this is definitely packing in adventurous moments, but when the main characters have almost no attachment to the final goals, it's really hard to care about what's going on, especially when the individual scenarios don't really add much to the story. This time, Lucy and Edmund are transported to the world of Narnia through a painting, along with their cousin, Eustace Scrubb. As the previous entry stated, Peter and Susan are too old for the world of Narnia, so the younger Pevensey children take on the older roles, while Eustace plays as the child. In regards to Will Poulter's performance, I've heard different things across the board about him, but to me, I find every aspect of this character quite annoying. He's loud, he's not funny, he doesn't really add much, not that any of the characters really do. The only time I can handle him is after he turns into a dragon. Yeah, we'll get to that. On the voyage, they must hunt down 7 lost lords and swords, in order to hold back some kind of evil force on a distant island, while traveling to the edge of the world. Very much a traditional fantasy tale, but like I said, this is all stuff that's only being introduced now, and the evil is not really ever distinguished or detailed. I guess it's meant to test the main characters, but this doesn't really happen much until the climax, and even then, it's hardly touched upon or challenging. Prince Caspian returns, and as a fan of Ben Barnes in the previous film, I was really happy to see him again, even if his accent suddenly changes to British rather than Spanish. Not really sure what happened to his voice since the events of the second movie. However, like all the characters, he really doesn't have much to work with here, other than the striving need to complete this pointless mission, and when he reaches the end, he realizes he can't continue further because he must go back and be a king over his people. I guess that's compelling, in a way, but when they don't really give enough conflict, you don't really end up feeling anything. I was fine with Susan and Peter being gone this time around because the oldest daughter never got much of a storyline anyways, and Peter's arc had a satisfying conclusion. We don't get much more from Edmund to work with, but Lucy actually has a good storyline, dealing with the fact that she doesn't like being seen as the youngest child, and comparing herself to Susan. This kind of stuff feels like something a child with many siblings would deal with, and it's one of the few things that actually works. Eustace turns into a dragon, and the effects look pretty bad. In fact, a lot of the visuals don't work this time around, except for Aslan and Reepicheep, who had been featured previously. Anything that's introduced just doesn't look as good as the first two entries, and for being the most recent movie, you'd think there could only be a gradual improvement. This had a smaller budget, but it wasn't a huge cut, so maybe they took all the money away from the effects department. The whole movie is shot completely different. It's a different aspect ratio, which is a pet peeve of mine in long-running movie series, and everything is mostly handheld with close-ups, and it gives an ugly TV show-like quality. Maybe that helps save money at times. I mean, the director himself typically works with television anyway, but gone are the beautiful scenery shots and epic scale. Instead, it feels like I'm watching a home movie of a family's getaway to Narnia. Reepicheep is not voiced by Eddie Izzard this time, instead we get Simon Pegg. I thought this would bug me more, especially since I was a fan of the character in Prince Caspian, but honestly, I think Simon Pegg brings even more to the role. He's even more cunning and warrior-like, he has quite a few funny lines, and develops a pretty interesting relationship with Eustace. In fact, the ending, while a bit pointless and uneventful, they actually give a really emotional conclusion to Reepicheep. Honestly, the whole movie should have been focused on him, because that all comes together perfectly. Of course, Aslan returns to do even less, and the White Witch keeps making random appearances. They want to keep bringing back stuff from the first flick, but it doesn't help the already weak story. This is a prime example of an adaptation based on an installment that was already lackluster. In order for the movie to be better, you'd either have to add elements or take things from other books, maybe even combine some stories, but I'm sure they could only change so much because they still need to follow the novels. It's all building towards a final film that they may need some of the boring stuff from this entry in order for the final entry to make sense. It just sucks that they never managed to even finish this. They planned the Silver Chair for years, but it sounds like they'll be rebooting the franchise on Netflix now. I'd like to see them actually complete the series at some point. The first two Disney films were pretty good, but they're only slowly getting less and less stellar, with Don Treader feeling out of place. I can imagine why people forgot about Narnia. These movies made enough money, I guess, but it wasn't the same as Harry Potter or Twilight, and they weren't released fast enough. Hopefully Netflix will get it right. But as for Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I don't really know how they'll adapt this one, and the 2010 film doesn't do much to make the story any better. Not entirely a great sequel to the previous films, but given the source material, it doesn't seem like they had much to work with anyway. Thanks to Lucas for this Patreon request, and thanks to all my Patreon supporters. For only $7, you can get your own monthly movie review. Ask me to review anything I haven't already. There's also other perks like blogs, exclusive videos, and early access. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and thanks so much for watching this video.